Hello once again, dear children. I thought with the questions being so complicated that we should try a few more questions. And thus I said I'd make one more video on general evolution before we go on to the video on human evolution. Note once again that so many different scenarios can be presented to you. The last one that we looked at was about the clover plant that produces cyanide through a mutation, and under cold conditions, the cyanide seeps out into the other tissues, killing the plant off. And we saw just how complicated the questions were. So I thought, let me just give you another question. And as we go to the question, I'll try and point out ways in which you can deal with future questions. And I'm sure you are going to be giving questions of the like in your exams. Question 14. Lizards of a certain species on an island are usually brown in color. Take note of all these important things as you are reading them. So they are usually brown in color. Okay, my darlings? See what we can do here. So they are usually brown, so that's their color. A mutation in one gene, so a mutation causes this drastic change, results in either red or black. So from brown, they become red, or from brown, they become black. Black lizards camouflage well against the dark rocks and warm up faster. So they got two advantages. They camouflage well and they warm up faster on cold days, which gives them the energy to avoid predators. So they got two advantageous characteristics, black lizards. And how were they produced? They were produced by mutation. Scientists investigated the relationship between the color of lizards in a population and their survival rate on an island. Okay, the relationship between color. So color is the independent factor. So if you want to see the effect of something, so color here is your independent factor and survival rate would be the dependent factor. They conducted the investigation as follows. So that's what they wanted to find out. So in your investigation, you will vary the color and then you will see how many survived on an island. So whenever you're reading something, think about how they went about doing the investigation and how would you go about doing the investigation. They selected a group of lizards of a certain species in a habitat. Of course, they have to be of the same species. Isn't that so for validity? They recorded the percentage of each color, brown, red, or black in the selected group. So there was variation, and the variation was that they were different colors. They repeated the investigation over a period of, let me just knock this off here, babies. They repeated the investigation over a period of 30 generations. That is a whole lot of reliability there, isn't that so? 30 generations of offspring, repeated and repeated over a long period of time. The results of the investigation are shown below. Let me just take away these annoying marks now, okay? So once again, I want to just emphasize to you, my darlings, how important it is to read the question carefully and take time to read it. So don't take your reading time lightly. Don't ever do that. The results, the brown lizards, initial population were 80. After the 10th generation, they were still 80. After the 20th generation, 70. After the 30th generation, 40. So they decreased over a period of time. 10, they were an initial population, but 0, 0, 0. So most probably they were very susceptible to being killed because maybe they noticed by predators, isn't that so? Black one, they were 10. Then they increased. So while brown and black decreased, while brown and red decreased, black actually increased. So most probably they had that favorable mutation and they passed a favorable allele to their offspring and their offspring had more of the favorable characteristic, and so it went on, and this caused that increase. Okay, so that's what we suppose from all our knowledge that we got. Let's look at the questions based on that. State the independent variable and dependent variable. We said the color of the lizard and the number that survived. Explain the effect of mutation on the survival of red lizards. Let's see. Red lizards, what would be the effect? Oh my goodness. So they were very noticed against the dark rocks. They were not camouflaged by the dark rocks, and the predators were able to spot them, and so they were eaten. Okay, causing them to decrease in number. Okay, until they became zero. So that mutation was a dangerous mutation. Explain why scientists had to conduct this investigation over 30 generations, of course, to improve reliability. State 2 ways in which the scientists could have improved the validity. Now remember, in validity, you must find that, how could they improve the validity? Papas, everything must be identical except for the one thing that is different, the color of the lizards. Of course, you must have the same species of lizard. Very importantly, I would have started off with the same numbers. Isn't that so? Why did you want to have 80 there, 10 and 10? I would have started off with the same number of lizards in your initial population. What more? You think about it as we go to the next question. Use the theory of natural selection to explain the higher percentage of black lizards in the population of the 30th generation. Look at the mark scheme and see how we can fashion our answer. So the variation was the color. What did black lizards have? You see, they had two advantages, isn't that so, my darlings? They had the advantage of camouflage and being able to have the energy to avoid predators, so they were able to survive and pass these favorable characteristics to their offspring. Draw a bar graph to compare the percentage of the brown and black lizards. So they only said brown and black. Very often children draw all three, you know. So read the question carefully. In the initial population and the 30th generation. See, read carefully. Okay. So you want an initial population and the 30th one. So the initial population and the 30th one. So it's a comparison. Isn't that so? Double bar graph. So let's look at the answers, my darlings. So once again, let me look at those questions. All right, babies. So the first one, independent and dependent. Explain the effect of mutation. Explain. So you've got to state what is the effect and explain it. Of course, the effect of the mutation is that it didn't confer on it any advantage because it was not camouflaged. And the effect would be that would cause the number of lizards. The effect would be the number of red lizards did not survive. They went from 10 to 0. Explain, they were made noticeable, they did not camouflage. So there must be two parts to the answer. Explain why generations and scientists had to conduct this investigation of 30 generations for 2 marks. 2 ways to improve the validity. Use the theory of natural selection to explain the higher percentage of black lizards, and then draw that bar graph. Okay, so let's look at the answer. Color of lizard was the independent variable, the one thing that was different, and the dependent variable would be the percentage survival of lizards. So that red one, of course, it's a harmful or a lethal mutation. Remember I told you previously, a mutation can be advantageous and a mutation can be disadvantageous. So here it's a harmful mutation, as they will be seen or spotted by the predators. Or red lizards do not warm up fast on cold days and they could not escape the predators. Remember, the black lizards could run. To ensure reliability of results, 1 mark. To improve reliability, also to allow enough time for reproduction and survival. So you can't do it over a short period of time. Okay, I like this one here. To allow enough time for reproduction and survival to be able to calculate the percentage. You must give enough time for reproduction. And a change in population proportions can only not be seen over a short period of time. So it can only be seen by a long period of time. This was a lovely question, right? To ensure reliability, why you had it over 30 generations, to allow enough time for reproduction, because you want to see how many of them survive. No? And a change in the population proportions will only be seen over a short period of time. How would you make it more valid? Conduct the investigation under the same environmental conditions. Don't change it, okay? Use the same sample technique, whatever technique you're using to calculate the percentage. Use the same number of lizards in each sample collected. Use equal numbers of males and females. Ensure that the lizards were fertile. I would never have thought about that, you know. Environmental conditions we always think about, isn't that so? Here they didn't mention same species of lizards, as I said to you. I'm sure that would also be acceptable. So use the same number of lizards in each sample collected. As I said to you, there was 80, 10, and 10, you know, percentage. That's just wrong to start up with that. And then use equal numbers of males and females for each category, you know, so that you'll have the chance of reproduction. Lovely question, this. How would Darwin have explained that? There is variation amongst the lizards. Some are red, black, or brown. Red and brown lizards are not camouflaged well against the dark rocks and are killed by predators. Black lizards are better camouflaged and survive and produce more and pass this favorable allele to the next generation, producing more black lizards in the next generation. That was an easier one to handle, isn't that so, my darlings? Unlike the one with the clover plants, we could actually be able to answer this well. Even I could answer this. Okay, loves? We did that one there. A mutation occurred within a species population of squirrels. No? A mutation occurred. This population was then separated by a river. So the mutation occurred, and then it was separated by a river. Many years later, it was discovered that the original population had undergone speciation. This process is shown below. So the mutation occurred, which caused this variation. No? And then they became separated by a river. So that became separated. So these are two coming from there. So these two are coming from there. Now, genotypic and phenotypic variations occurred, such that now you only got one type here. So this is one species. This is a total different species. So they'll never be able to mate with each other, even if I remove the river. So in other words, the environmental conditions here and the environmental conditions here were totally different from each other. So natural selection occurred independently in both these areas. And you find that the population became genotypically and phenotypically different from each other, such that even if you remove the barrier, they would not be able to interbreed with each other. They have become two distinct species. This is speciation. Define a term population. Remember, there was that fantastic mnemonic, SHIT. Other than mutation, 3 causes of variation. Lovely, isn't it? So one is meiosis, remember, crossing over and random arrangement of chromosomes in metaphase 1 and 2. And the other was random mating, random fertilization. Okay. Explain why there were eventually more squirrels with a mutation on one side of the river. Okay. Of course, the mutations would have conferred on them a favorable characteristic, and you find that the environment had changed, so these would have the characteristic that enables them to survive in that new environment, and they would reproduce, passing the favorable allele to their offspring, causing the subsequent generations to have more and more of this mutation being present. Explain what effect the process above has on the biodiversity in the ecosystem. Oh my God, you have now decreased because biodiversity, sorry, you have increased. You have now got, if this was one ecosystem, biodiversity refers to a the number of different species in an area. So if this is one particular area, you now have got, this was one species. This is actually, there's mutation. This is a species. This is a species, but that has now brought about variation. It's not two different species here, Papa. But then you find that once this happens, darlings, you have now got one species here and another species here. So from one species, you now have got two different species. So you have increased biodiversity. It was discovered that species A and B were two separate species. Describe what can be done to confirm that squirrels belong to different biological species. Now, how did I say? I said to you, if you're two different species, you would not be able to mate with each other to produce fertile offspring. So what could you do? You could interbreed them and check whether their offspring are fertile or not. Okay, so let's look at the answers, my darlings. This was question number 16. Population is a group of SHIT, a population of a group of organisms of the same species that can interbreed to produce fertile offspring and occupy a given area or a habitat at a certain time. So S, same species, H, given habitat, I, interbreed in a specific time. Crossing over, random arrangement of chromosome, random fertilization, random mating. This is so odd because sometimes they give this as one mark only. Are you with me? Because crossing over and random arrangement of chromosomes both occur in meiosis. So God knows, how the examiners think. And sometimes if the child did this here, crossing over there and there, they'll give the child just 2 marks. So we really don't know which way your examiners go. I prefer meiosis and put down there crossing over and random arrangement. So if they were given 2 marks, you'd have got your 2 marks in the first line. And then you could also write down random fertilization, random mating. So what was the question now? Sorry, for 16.3, they asked, explain why there were eventually more squirrels with a mutation. Are you with me? Why there were more squirrels with a mutation? The squirrels with favorable characteristics caused by the mutation survived. Since they are better suited, these characteristics are passed on to future generations. Exactly what we said. Are you with me? So it's always based on your theory, babies. What would happen to biodiversity since there are now 2 species? In other words, you've got a new species of squirrels, the biodiversity is increased. How would you find that there are 2 different species? Allow them to interbreed, and they would not produce fertile offspring if they are 2 different species. If they produce fertile offspring, then they are same species. Are you with me? So if they're 2 different species, they will not produce fertile offspring. There we go. Or you can conduct DNA tests and compare them. Lovely, my darlings? Good. I just want you to look at this essay. And come back to that one. Differentiate between a population and species. Of course, if you know the mnemonic SHIT and SIVF, you got this in the bag. Describe speciation by geographic isolation. You got that as well because we learned it's a general one, Explain how speciation and extinction affect biodiversity. Speciation is the production of new species, so it will improve biodiversity or increase it. Extinction killing of a species completely, and that will decrease biodiversity. But we don't know how marks are given here, so write as much as possible. So let's look at the memo. 18. Oh, that's 15. I'll come back to that. Differences. A species is a group of organisms similar to SIVF, able to interbreed to produce viable and fertile offspring. Population, a group of organisms, same species, S, found in the same habitat at the same time. What they didn't have here, able to interbreed. You must put that down. This is a general one for Speciation by geographic isolation. You can learn this general one, but be able to adapt it. A group of organisms becomes split into two or maybe three. Here they're talking about two by a geographical barrier. The two populations cannot interbreed and there's no gene flow. Natural selection occurs independently due to environmental conditions on either side of the barrier. I would have said due to different environmental conditions, natural selection occurs independently. The two populations become genotypically and phenotypically different from each other. Even if you remove the geographical barrier, the individuals will not be able to interbreed. We say that the original population has now become two separate species. Effect of speciation and extinction. Since there's an increase in the number of species through speciation, speciation increases biodiversity. Extinction results in a loss of the number of species, therefore decreases biodiversity. We'd have done very well in that one at least, hey? Good. I wanted to go back to question number 15 with that essay. Notice the essays can come from anywhere in your text, my darling, anywhere. There was variation in the length of the neck in a population of Galapagos tortoises. If you didn't even know how to pronounce Galapagos, that's even fine. So what was the variation in the neck? The original population from the mainland was separated into two islands with different environmental conditions. So that was speciation, isn't that so? Many years later, it was established that speciation occurred. Describe how mutations and meiosis lead to variation within a population and the role of variation in the speciation of the tortoises. How's that? The role of variation. So where is the variation? In neck length. So what would neck length have to do with, neck length means those with longer neck would be able to reach food that was higher up. Those with short length necks would not be able to reach food that's higher up. Okay, but how does it play a role in speciation? So those with the longer necks will survive more. But let's see I wouldn't even know which way to go. Let's see which way they went. You think about it before I show you the memo. So we looked at the role of meiosis and mutation in variation. Learn this off by heart. A mutation is a change in the DNA or a change in the number or size of the chromosome. Because remember, you got genetic mutation, gene mutation, and you got chromosomal mutation. So you can have a change in the DNA, or the sequence of the genes, a sequence of the nucleotides, or you can have a change in the number of chromosome, like you see in Down syndrome, number of chromosome changes, or the size of a chromosome, number or size of a chromosome. Mutation introduces new alleles, which results in new genotypes and hence new phenotypes. Oh my God, my darlings, just look at it. Mutation introduces new alleles, resulting in new genotypes and hence new phenotypes. I never looked at that like that before, did you? So we said mutation, we only know is a change in DNA or change in the number of chromosomes, but how does it bring on a characteristic which either suit an environmental change or even not be suitable to environmental change because it introduces new alleles. Please learn this off. This is like a lekker thing to learn off, babies. It introduces new alleles, which results in new genotypes. Remember, your genotype will now determine your phenotype. Wow, that's something else, isn't it so? Okay, so that's one of the things you make sure you take note of and learn it off. This part of mutation. What's the advantage? It can be an advantage, it can be a disadvantage, okay? So mutations introduce new alleles, which result in new genotypes, and new genotypes would result in new phenotypes. Okay, meiosis, how it brings about variation. So here you got to write about crossing over, and you got to write about the random arrangement of chromosomes. In prophase 1 of meiosis, crossing over occurs between homologous chromosomes, results in the exchange of genetic material, leading to chromosomes with a mixture of maternal and paternal genetic material. Leading to chromosomes which are now a mixture of maternal and paternal genetic material. Previously, they were either maternal or paternal. Now, when there's genetic material exchanged, you're now leading to chromosomes with a mixture of maternal and paternal genetic material. In metaphase of meiosis, random arrangement of chromosome occurs, leading to chromosomes moving into gametes in different combinations, and different combinations of chromosomes will result in different phenotypes. Isn't that so? Because chromosomes will determine your phenotype. So that's how you'll get your variation. So once again, learn this off by heart. There are certain things which are non-negotiables that you've got to learn off by heart. Role of variation in this Galapagos tortoises. Speciation occurred through geographical isolation. The original population was separated by a sea or a body of water. There was no gene flow, but there was variation in the neck length within each population. Each population was exposed to different environmental conditions and underwent natural selection independently. Over a long period of time, two populations became different genotypically and phenotypically. When the two populations were mixed again, they were unable to interbreed. Notice, my darlings, this was just speciation. Where was the role of the speciation, What was the role of the speciation, of that variation? What was the role, It was like so crazy to be able to ask the child to just write generally about speciation, and just talking about speciation. But the role of variation in speciation, no one mentioned the role of the variation. Nowhere was it mentioned. Absolutely nowhere. So they just mentioned that there was variation in the neck length within each population. So the population became separated. We're talking about speciation. So you talk about the geographical isolation, but nowhere did they even say which neck length would have advantaged each population in each of the environmental conditions. No, this is one of the reasons why these type of thing angers me, because you fashioned the question in such a way where you wanted the role of the variation in speciation, but you just gave a generic answer here. But an advantage to those people who just described speciation, they would have got like at least 7 marks for that, if they just described variation. Okay, my darlings? So with that being said, we've covered quite a bit. I just want to go back to the last part of your evolution. So we looked at so many things, babies. We looked at evidence for evolution. We looked at sources of variation, mutations and meiosis and random arrangement of chromosomes, crossing over and random mating, random fertilization, etc. We looked at continuous and discontinuous variation. We looked at Lamarck's theory, Darwin's theory, speciation, punctuated equilibrium. Wow, so many things. And now we're looking at the last part, which is evolution in modern times. And there is evidence of evolution in modern times where you do have amongst your mosquitoes, you find that there are mosquitoes that are DDT resistant. Previously, my darling, DDT was the pesticide to go to kill mosquitoes, especially those that cause malaria. Now we find that mosquitoes are now DDT resistant. And then we're finding that we're getting bacteria that are antibiotic resistant. They are resistant to antibiotics. Remember, antibiotics were made to kill bacteria and fungi, etc. But now we are getting bacteria that cannot be killed by antibiotics. So that means that something has happened to bring about this resistance that we're seeing. And this is something that we're talking about is evolution in modern day times. The diagram below represents the changes in the population of bacteria over time as a result of exposure to an antibiotic over time. Original population, there's a key, low resistance, medium resistance, high resistance. So in the original population of bacteria, you had all three types of variation. So that was a variation. Then after a period of time, in the final population that you're seeing now, you only got bacteria that are medium resistance to antibiotic and of high resistance. You don't have bacteria that are of low resistance. They don't appear anymore. So you've got to try even harder to get rid of this bacterial infection. Explain in terms of natural selection the shift in resistance level of the bacteria illustrated above for 8 marks. 8 marks. So remember, if we're looking at natural selection, you first have to talk about the variation that exists, which one conferred on the bacteria a favorable characteristic, which one did not confer a favorable characteristic. Okay, so let's look at the memo here. There is a large degree of variation, 1 mark you'd have got. When the antibiotic was first used, it killed off a large number of bacteria, which were not resistant to the antibiotic, I would have said. So they did not have the favorable characteristic and they were killed off. That's what I would have said. But some bacteria were resistant to the antibiotic and survived. They had the favorable characteristic of resistance. Those that survived were able to reproduce, increasing the population of resistant bacteria. Continued use of the antibiotic had little effect on the resistant bacteria, hence the resistant bacteria increased and the non-resistant bacteria decreased. Would we have said this here, continued use of the antibiotic? I wouldn't have said that there, Papa. I would have just said increasing the population of the resistant bacteria. Are you with me? So that's how they got the 8 marks. So you have to put in more information to come up to those 8 marks here. 1 mark we would have got, I would have said that though there's a large degree of variation, some bacteria were not resistant, while some bacteria were medium or high resistant, or had a medium or high resistance to the antibiotic. When the antibiotic was used, it killed off those that were not resistant. Those of them who were medium and high resistance survived. And they passed on this favorable characteristic to their offspring through reproduction, increasing the population of resistant bacteria. I would never have said this here. Are you with me? So continued use of the antibiotic had little effect on the resistant bacteria, hence the resistant bacteria increased. Every day there's something to learn. All right, let me see if there's any question here on evolution in modern day times. I could do question 17, but it wouldn't be evolution in modern day times. But let's just end up by looking at question 17. The reason why I want to go through these questions is that I want to say to you, or I want to prove to you, that there are many questions with voluminous amounts to be read. And very often when children see that there's so much reading to be done, automatically they get psyched out. And I want to say to you, babies, don't. Because much of the answers lie in the correct reading and insightful reading of the passages. Read the extract below. Long before the development of agricultural crops, South African villagers would pick the sweetest and largest fruit of the Marula tree and scatter them around their camps. That's one way of sustainable use of a resource, isn't that so? Picking them and scattering them so that the seeds would germinate and grow into fruit-bearing trees. The best fruit would then be chosen from these trees and the process would be repeated. In recent times, farmers use a process called marcotting. Now, when children read this, oh my God, my teacher didn't tell me about marcotting. Whenever there is a brand new term introduced to you, babies, they will always explain it to you. So don't ever be scared. In recent times, the farmers used a process called marcotting. This involves peeling away the bark in one area around a branch. This area is stimulated to form roots. The branch is then removed from the tree and planted in soil to produce more Marula trees. So they don't have to grow from the seeds. It'll grow much faster, isn't it so? Name the characteristic that the villagers were selecting. Of course, they wanted what type of fruit did they want? Sweetest and largest fruit. Name the characteristics. Explain how this, because they chose artificial selection where humans do the selection, isn't that so? Where they chose fruit only from these trees. Are you with me? And spread out their seeds for them to germinate so they would now grow up and have the sweetest and largest fruit. Give one environmental factor that could affect the characteristic mentioned in question 17.3. I think it would be 17.2. 17.1 this would have been. Give one environmental factor. Would pick the sweetest and largest. Which environmental factor? It'll be any environmental factor that would affect the growth of plants. You think about it. Explain one disadvantage of a plantation of Marula trees grown through marcotting compared to a population of Marula trees that have been reproduced naturally. Oh, wow. Isn't this a lovely question? Because here, as I was reading it, if you are growing a branch, if you're peeling away a branch and allowing roots, that genetic composition of this plant will be identical to the one that you had done the process of marcotting on. So you've introduced no new genes, no? Because natural reproduction would be an increase in the variety of genes because you're getting two different organisms coming together. So here, my darling, you got no variation in the genes, and should they be exposed to a new environmental condition, all of them will be perished should they not have a gene that confers an advantageous characteristic. So the whole idea, this is a type of asexual reproduction, and asexual reproduction does not increase the gene pool, does not bring about genetic diversity or genetic variation. Explain whether the fruits from marcotted could be classified as genetically modified. Can't be genetically modified, isn't it? So you haven't changed the genes. They are being produced from one plant. Genetic modification is where you take a gene from another organism and insert into, and from one organism and insert into another organism. So here you're not inserting genes. In other words, here they're trying to ask you, do you know what's genetic modification? And here you're not introducing new genes. It is just the same organism that you are using. State 2 benefits of genetic modification. Can they ask it here? Yes, because genetics falls in the same paper as evolution. So let's look at the answers. 17.1. So what did they want? Taste and sweetness. How would this be regarded as artificial selection? Humans selected the fruits with desirable characteristics and scattered them. So humans did the selecting, isn't that so? So what would affect plant growth? I don't like climate, but we'd say water, soil, light, anything that affects plant growth. I hope you had got it right. If trees are produced from marcotting, there would be no variation within the population. Trees would be genetically identical. So any change in the environment affecting one tree will probably destroy the whole population because you got no new characteristics introduced. Isn't that so, papas? So would you think that this is genetic modification? No. The fruits cannot be labeled because there was no gene transfer. Are you with me? Advantages of genetic modification. Learn this off by heart. Production of resources cheaply or medication cheaply. Easy ones. Allows a faster production time. You can have organisms with resistance to drought, pests, herbicide, diseases. Sometimes these are regarded as one advantage, developing a resistance to these things. introducing genes to improve human health, improving the quality of a crop. Are you babies? So I hope we've done a fair representation of the type of questions that you could have in these papers, in your papers about evolution. And notice the variety, my darlings. My suggestion to you would be go through this over and over again and study hard. Until I meet you again, God bless.